This is HOA. Karen gets denied. Let me set the scene fast. Joan stood at my back gate with a tape measure in one hand and a clipboard in the other, her face already red. You are about to get another inspection, she said, not asked. I had been home from my shift at the apartment complex for maybe 20 minutes, still in my work polo, safety glasses pushed up on my forehead, and she was already measuring something. I stepped outside. The sun hit hard, sharp shadows falling across the fence line I had just started building 2 days ago. She did not look up. Smile, I am documenting this for the file, she said, snapping a photo of the post I had set in concrete that morning. I asked what the problem was. She said the fence height violated Section 4 of the community standards, and the setback was wrong, and I did not submit an amendment for the style change. I told her I submitted everything 3 weeks ago and got written approval. She said approval could be frozen at any time, and she could freeze all approvals. Because she could. That was when I knew this was going to be bad. I live in Billings, Montana, in a neighborhood called Hidden Creek, run by the Hidden Creek Property Owners Association. The place is one of those developments where every backyard upgrade becomes a committee argument. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was decent and I needed something stable after a rough year. My mental health had been fragile, panic attacks, insomnia, the kind of thing that makes you avoid conflict. I work as an apartment maintenance supervisor, so I know how to handle complaints, but Joan was different. She was the neighborhood watch liaison, which meant she treated residents like suspects. She carried that tabbed binder everywhere, no readable text on the tabs, just color codes, and she loved pulling it out mid-conversation to read policy at you. She had a small collapsible step stool she used to inspect fence height, which sounds funny until you see her actually climb it in your driveway to measure your mailbox post. I asked her again what the issue was. She said the fence was 6 inches over the maximum height and the posts were 2 inches inside the setback easement. I told her I had the survey report and the approved plans. She said surveys could be challenged and plans could be revoked during construction if the board determined a safety issue. I asked what safety issue. She pointed at a plastic dump truck near the fence line, left by a neighbor kid who cuts through my yard sometimes. She said my project created an attractive nuisance and the toy proved kids were drawn to the construction zone. I stared at her. The toy had been there for a week, long before I started digging post holes. She took another photo. I let her talk because every word was helping me. I knew she was building a case, and I knew she was doing it sloppily. She handed me a notice. Not an official HOA form, just a printed page she had made herself. It said I had 72 hours to submit amended plans or face a $500 fine and a mandatory compliance hearing. I asked when the hearing would be. She said it would be scheduled at a time convenient for the board. That was the tell. The HOA had a habit of scheduling hearings at impossible times so residents would no-show and they could default vote. I had seen them do it to another guy 2 months ago over a shed. He missed the hearing because it was at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday and he worked days. They fined him $2,000 and made him tear the shed down. I was not going to let that happen. I called my buddy Eric that night. He is a local mediator who handles HOA disputes for a living, and he had warned me about Joan when I first moved in. He said she ran her committee like a private police force with no authority, writing up violations for things that were not even in the rules. He told me to document everything, get a third-party surveyor if I had not already, and do not respond to anything that was not on official HOA letterhead. I told him about the notice. He laughed and said it was not enforceable, but that did not mean she would not try. He said the trick with Joan was to stay calm and let her escalate, because she always overplayed her hand. He also told me to check the vendor contracts, because the HOA had been sloppy about transparency and there were rumors of favoritism. I did not know what he meant at the time, but I filed it away. The next morning I woke up to my contractor texting me. He said someone had been on the site taking pictures at 6 in the morning and his crew was spooked. I asked if it was Joan. He said no, it was a guy in a Hidden Creek polo. I realized she had sent someone else to do surveillance. I got dressed and went outside. The fence posts were still standing, no damage, but someone had moved one of my orange cones about 3 feet to make it look like I was blocking the easement. I took photos from every angle, timestamps on, and sent them to Eric. He said that was evidence of tampering and to save everything. Then my phone rang. It was Joan. She said the board had reviewed my project overnight and determined I needed an emergency hearing that afternoon at 4. I told her I could not make it. I had to pick up my sister from the airport at 4:30, and it was a strict time. She said the hearing was mandatory, and if I no-showed, they would vote to halt construction and fine me. I told her that was not how it worked. She said, "Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth." That line stuck with me. It was so arrogant, so sure, and it was going to come back on her hard. I called Eric again. He said do not go to the hearing. It was a trap. If I showed up without a lawyer, they would steamroll me, and if I did not show up, they would vote, but it would not hold up under appeal because the notice period was too short. He said to email the board president directly, CC the management company, and state that I was not given proper notice under the bylaws and I was requesting a formal rescheduling with at least 14 days written notice. I did that. 10 minutes later, Joan called me back, furious. She said I was playing games and the board did not appreciate residents who hid behind technicalities. I told her I was not hiding. I was following the rules she claimed to care about so much. She hung up. That afternoon, I picked up my sister and told her the whole story on the drive back. She is a paralegal, and she told me to get a real surveyor out there ASAP, not just the one I used for the permit, but a third-party one who could testify if it went to court. She also said to start a paper trail of every interaction, every email, every photo, every notice. I was already doing that, but hearing her say it made it feel official. When I got home, there was another notice taped to my door, this one on actual HOA letterhead. It said the board had voted in absentia to issue a stop work order and a $1,000 fine pending a rescheduled hearing. I checked the timestamp on the email I had sent. The board meeting had started 15 minutes after I sent it, which meant they did not even read my email before voting. That was procedural misconduct, and Eric confirmed it when I forwarded him the notice. The next day, I got the third-party surveyor out. His name was Rick, and he had been doing property surveys in Montana for 30 years. He brought his equipment and spent an hour checking the pins, the setback lines, and the fence layout. When he was done, he told me my fence was perfect, exactly on the line, exactly the right height per county code, and the HOA standard I was accused of violating did not even apply to my lot because my parcel was grandfathered under an older plat. He said he would write it all up in a report and I could use it however I needed. I asked him if he had dealt with Hidden Creek before. He sighed and said yes, and Joan specifically. He said she had a habit of misreading the standards on purpose to create violations where none existed. He said the board usually backed her up because they did not want to admit they were wrong. I thanked him and paid him on the spot. That same afternoon, my contractor called. He said someone had shown up on site and tried to intimidate his crew. It was Joan, and she had brought a guy in a Hidden Creek vest who claimed to be the compliance officer. They told the crew they were working on a suspended project, and if they did not stop immediately, the HOA would report them to the county and revoke their business license. My contractor is a good guy, but he is not a lawyer, and he got rattled. He told his crew to pack up. I called him back and told him the stop work order was not valid. It was issued without proper notice, and I had a surveyor report proving the project was compliant. He said he believed me, but he did not want trouble with the HOA. I told him I would handle it and asked him to give me 24 hours. He agreed, but said if the HOA showed up again, he was done. I went to the HOA office the next morning. It is a little suite in a strip mall on the north side of town, shared with a dental office and a tax preparer. The board president, a retired guy named Dale, was there. I handed him the surveyor report and my original approved plans. I told him the stop work order was invalid, and if they did not rescind it, I was going to file a complaint with the management company and copy the state HOA ombudsman. He read the report, slowly, and then he sighed. He said Joan had told him I was non-compliant and my project was a safety risk. I asked him if he had seen my original plans. He said no. I asked him if anyone on the board had reviewed the surveyor report before voting. He said no. I told him that was a problem. He said he would bring it up at the next board meeting, which was 2 weeks away. I told him that was not good enough. My contractor was spooked and I was losing time. He said there was nothing he could do until the board met. I thanked him for his time and left. That night, someone moved a second notice onto my door. This one claiming I had missed the rescheduled hearing. The hearing had never been rescheduled. I checked my email, my voicemail, my mail. Nothing. The notice said because I no-showed again, the fine was now $1,500, and the stop work order was permanent until I submitted a new application and paid a reinspection fee. I called Eric and read it to him. He said it was fraud, plain and simple. He said to photograph the notice, photograph the time and date stamp, and photograph my email inbox showing no correspondence. Then he said to send a formal demand letter to the board and the management company stating that I was being harassed and requesting an immediate third-party review. I did all of that. 2 days later, Joan showed up at my house again, this time with a tow truck. She said my contractor truck had been parked on the street in violation of the parking rules and she was having it towed. The truck was not mine, it was my contractor, and he was not even there. I told her that. She said the truck was parked for more than 48 hours, and that triggered the tow provision. I checked my phone. The truck had been there for 6 hours. I showed her the photo timestamp. She ignored it and told the tow driver to hook it up. The driver looked uncomfortable. He asked Joan if she was sure the HOA authorized this. She said yes and handed him a work order she had printed herself. The driver hesitated. He said he needed to see an official tow authorization with a signature from the management company or the board president. Joan insisted the tow was authorized, and the tow driver hesitated even more. He finally said he was not comfortable proceeding without proper paperwork, and he left. Joan turned on me and said I was obstructing HOA enforcement and she was filing a formal complaint. I told her to go ahead. If you are enjoying this wild ride, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the paper trail wins. That night, I sent a long email to every homeowner in Hidden Creek. I had gotten the contact list from a neighbor who was fed up with the board. In the email, I attached the surveyor report, my original approved plans, the fraudulent stop work order, the fake hearing notice, and photos of Joan trying to tow a truck that was not mine. I wrote a short summary explaining that I was being harassed over a compliant fence project and the HOA was violating its own bylaws. I asked anyone who had similar experiences to reach out. Within an hour, I had 12 replies. By morning, I had 30. People were furious. Apparently, Joan had been doing this to multiple residents, filing bogus violations, scheduling impossible hearings, and intimidating contractors. One guy said she had tried to fine him for a garden gnome. Another said she reported his kids for riding bikes on the sidewalk. A third said she had called the cops on his dog for barking during the day, even though there was no noise ordinance. The board called an emergency meeting 3 days later. It was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10, which was actually reasonable for once. I showed up with Eric, my surveyor report, my photo evidence, and printed copies of the 30 emails from other residents. The meeting was in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and a folding table up front. Dale was there, along with 2 other board members, and Joan, sitting off to the side with her tabbed binder and her stack of pre-filled forms. She looked calm, almost smug. The meeting started, and Dale said they were there to discuss my fence project and the alleged violations. I asked to speak first. He said I could have 5 minutes. I laid it all out. I showed the surveyor report proving my fence was compliant. I showed the approved plans proving I had followed the process. I showed the fake stop work order proving the board had voted without proper notice. I showed the fraudulent hearing notice proving Joan had lied about rescheduling. I showed the photos of the tow attempt proving she was harassing me. Then I pulled out the 30 emails from other residents and said this was not an isolated incident, it was a pattern. The room went quiet. One of the board members, a woman named Linda, asked Joan to respond. Joan said I was exaggerating and the other residents were disgruntled troublemakers. She said her job was to enforce the rules and sometimes that made people unhappy. She said, "Your camera does not matter, my minutes are the truth." Linda cut her off and said actually the camera did matter and the surveyor report mattered and the emails mattered. She asked Dale if he had reviewed any of this before the stop work vote. He admitted he had not. Then I played my trump card. I had been holding on to it because every word Joan said was helping me, and I knew the right moment would come. I pulled out a packet of invoices I had gotten from a budget review a neighbor had requested under the state open records law. The invoices showed that the HOA had been paying a landscaping vendor, owned by Joan's brother-in-law, triple the market rate for basic mowing and trimming. The contract had been renewed 3 times without a bid process, which was a direct violation of the HOA bylaws. The total overpayment was about $40,000 over 2 years. I handed the packet to Dale and said I was not a lawyer, but it looked like vendor favoritism and possible kickbacks. I said I was not making any accusations, I was just sharing public records. Dale's face went white. Linda took the packet and started flipping through it. The third board member, a guy named Tom, asked Joan if this was true. Joan said the landscaping contract was a separate issue and had nothing to do with my fence. I said actually it had everything to do with my fence, because it showed a pattern of Joan abusing her position and the board failing to provide oversight. Dale asked for a recess. We took 15 minutes. When we came back, Dale said the board had reviewed the evidence and they were rescinding the stop work order, rescinding the fines, and issuing a formal apology. He said they would also be launching an audit of all vendor contracts and scheduling a special election to review board leadership. Joan stood up and said this was a witch hunt and she was being scapegoated for doing her job. Linda cut her off again and said the evidence was clear. Joan had overstepped her authority, misrepresented the rules, and created a hostile environment for multiple residents. She said the board was voting immediately to censure Joan, strip her committee powers, and ban her from contacting homeowners outside official meetings. The vote was unanimous. Joan grabbed her binder and left. That should have been the end, but Joan was not done. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store near my house picking up some concrete mix for the last fence posts, and she cornered me in the parking lot. She said I had ruined her reputation and destroyed her standing in the community. She said she was going to sue me for defamation and harassment. I told her to go ahead, I had documentation for everything. She pulled out her phone and said she was recording this conversation and I was threatening her. I laughed and pulled out my own phone, already recording. I said I was not threatening anyone, I was defending myself against her harassment. A couple of other shoppers stopped and watched. She realized she had an audience and she started yelling that I was a liar and a troublemaker and I had fabricated evidence. One of the shoppers, an older guy, said he lived in Hidden Creek and he had gotten my email, and he believed me. Another shopper said she did not live there, but Joan was acting unhinged. Joan got louder, saying the board was corrupt and the homeowners were turning against her because I had poisoned the well. She kept yelling and more people stopped. Finally, a store manager came out and asked if there was a problem. Joan said I was harassing her. The manager looked at me, then at Joan, then at the small crowd, and asked Joan to leave. She refused. The manager said he would call the police if she did not leave. She finally got in her car and drove off. I went home and called Eric. He said the parking lot confrontation was perfect because it showed she was unraveling and it was witnessed. He said if she followed through on her lawsuit threat, I should countersue for harassment and emotional distress. He also said the vendor favoritism issue was going to get worse for her because the state HOA ombudsman had jurisdiction over contract fraud and they took that stuff seriously. I asked what I should do next. He said nothing, just finish the fence and let the process play out. I took his advice. The fence took another week to finish. My contractor came back once the board sent him a letter confirming the stop work order was rescinded and he would not face retaliation. The final result looked great. Exactly what I had planned. Exactly on the property line. Exactly the right height. I planted some shrubs along the base and put in a small gate. It felt good to have something solid and permanent, something Joan could not take away. A month later, the HOA held the special election. Joan tried to run for board president, but she was disqualified because of the censure vote. Dale stepped down voluntarily, and Linda was elected president. One of her first acts was to hire a new management company and implement a transparent vendor bid process. She also revised the bylaws to require 14 days written notice for any hearing and to allow residents to request third-party mediation before fines were issued. The changes passed with overwhelming support. I got a personal apology letter from Linda and a refund check for all the bogus fines, plus reimbursement from my surveyor and my legal consult with Eric. The board also published new standards and timelines to all homeowners, so there would be no more confusion about what was allowed. The vendor audit came back and confirmed what I had suspected. Joan's brother-in-law had been overcharging the HOA for years, and Joan had approved every invoice without review. The state ombudsman opened an investigation, and the landscaping company lost its contract. Joan and her brother-in-law were named in a civil complaint filed by the HOA to recover the overpayments. I do not know how that case ended because I stopped following it, but I heard from Eric that they settled, and Joan had to pay back about $15,000. I still live in Hidden Creek. The neighborhood is quieter now. Joan moved out about 6 months after the election. I heard she went to live with family in another state. The new board is not perfect, but they are fair and they follow the rules. I even joined the architecture committee as a volunteer, mostly to make sure no one else gets put through what I went through. My fence is still standing, solid and level, exactly where it should be. Every time I walk past it, I think about that first day Joan showed up with her tape measure and her arrogance, so sure she could bully me into submission. She underestimated two things: my willingness to document everything and her own inability to stop talking. In the end, it was not the surveyor report that sank her. It was not even the vendor kickbacks. It was her own words. Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth. Except my camera did matter, and her minutes were lies, and the truth won. Until next time, keep your paper trail.